As the weather starts getting warmer and as we gain an extra hour of sunlight to our day, there's no better topic to talk about than tea. It's a delicious low caffeine option a lot of people use to start their day or possibly sip on during the evening as they enjoy their time on the couch. And maybe as you sip your hot leaf water, you start to question your tea. Am I making the right decision? Which other tea options may I like? Should I move on to loose leaf? What even is yerba? Etc. etc. Well, that's why I'm here to answer and babble on about things I'm curious about. And this time it seems to be about tea. So I hope you enjoy this video and listening to me babble about tea. When most people refer to tea, they're typically talking about anything that's a dried piece of a plant that they infuse in water, when in reality, there are only 5 or 6, depending how you see it, true teas that all originate from a singular plant. The Camellia sinensis, more commonly known as the tea plant, is a shrub that's native to Southeast Asia and grows the leaves we use for tea. The ideal environment for the plant to grow in seems to be tropical highlands because of the constant flowing of moisture, acidic dirt, humidity, and the change in temperature from night to day helps the plant grow slowly and brings out more of its flavor. This also makes it so the plant can grow in many different parts of the world, which is why tea is practically seen everywhere. The different regions that tea is grown in could really affect the flavoring components of the tea. But we care most about the leaves and buds right now because it's literally tea leaves. The way the leaves are prepared will determine what kind of tea we end up with. Those types of tea are green, white, oolong, black, and pu'er. The mysterious sixth flavor I alluded to earlier is yellow tea, but it's a lot less common than the other 5. All these teas are basically prepared the same way, but one key step is what differentiates one tea from the other. The first step is plucking the leaves. This could be done by hand or by machine, but doing it by hand does allow you to be more precise with what you pick and get better quality tea. There seems to be different methods on which leaves get plucked, since some growers pick younger leaves and leaf buds for green and white tea, and the larger older ones are used for black and oolong, while others will only pick the buds and the last 2 leaves for all types of tea. The second step is withering the leaves in order to get rid of some of the moisture and to prepare them for the next step. This is traditionally done by laying them out to dry, but this could take multiple hours, so machines could be used to speed up the process. But not giving the leaves some time to dry could ruin the quality of the final result. Third step is oxidation, which is breaking the cell to expose the leaves' enzymes to the air. This is the key step that differentiates one tea from the other. This step is skipped for green tea, so they aren't oxidized. White tea uses the youngest leaves and is only slightly oxidized. Oolong teas are typically 20 to 70% oxidized, which gives it a wide range of ways it could taste. It could be more like a green or black tea, or maybe be somewhere between the two. Black tea leaves are 80 to 100% oxidized, so they're typically crushed or rolled to oxidize as much as possible. Just like the previous step, machines could be used, but they could put the quality and leaf size at risk. The fourth step is fixation, which stops oxidation by heating the leaves. Since green tea isn't oxidized, this step is done right after withering. Fixation seems to be typically done by roasting the leaves in a pan, similar to how they do in China, but other regions like Japan might use a more moist method of heating by steaming the leaves. Before this fifth step is done, the leaves could be rolled and shaped, but this is just optional. The fifth step will be drying the leaves in order to get rid of most of the remaining moisture. This leaves us with tea that is ready to be categorized by size and grade and then packaged for consumers. But what about puree and yellow tea? Well, puree follows the same process up to step 4, but afterwards it's typically pressed into tea cakes, or it can be left as loose leaf and then fermented and aged by being introduced to some good bacteria. Yellow tea is made in a similar process to green tea, but it's roasted at a lower temperature, then sealed away by being wrapped in cloth and allowed to rest. This allows the moisture inside the leaves to oxidize without having the air around it interfere, which gives it its yellow color. All of this makes the creation of yellow tea a time-consuming and delicate process, which means not everybody's going to be making it, and it's not going to be easy to find. With this process that separates these leaves from one another, it gives us a range of oxidation that helps us easily compare the flavor of the teas. If you want something that's more vegetable and grassy, which trust me, it's tasty, then you want to go for a green tea. But if you want something that's more bold and malty, then you'll go for a black tea. And oolong is sort of there for those who might want a combination of both, or maybe want the majority of one flavor with a slight hint of the other. I've never had white tea, but it's described to be similar to green tea, but slightly sweeter and delicate. And yellow tea is also described to be similar to green tea, but with a more mellow flavor. Something I'd like to touch on real quick before moving on would be the caffeine content in tea. It's true that a cup of tea contains less caffeine than a cup of coffee, but the amount of caffeine in tea is a bit confusing because the environment it is grown in could affect the amount of caffeine it contains. This is why tea is given a range for caffeine instead of a fixed number, and these ranges could be quite big, which could end you up with a green tea that has more caffeine than a black tea. But how long the tea is steeped could also affect the caffeine amount, since longer steeps typically mean more caffeine. Even with all these confusing concepts, black tea normally contains the most caffeine, with the amount being about half as much as coffee, and green tea containing about half as much as black tea. But if these are the only true teas, then what about my hibiscus, chamomile, and butterfly pea? Well, those are herbal teas, or tea saints, which are any teas that don't come from the Camellia sinensis. These teas use more than just the leaves, since they could come from any part of the plant, or could be made of just one or a mixture of plants. And of these teas coming from such a large majority of plants, most of them are caffeine-free and have flavor profiles that are unique from one another. When it comes to preparing the plants for teas, they seem to be made similar to green tea since they aren't oxidized. Those seem to be the only major differences that separate herbal and true teas. There are smaller things such as how long you might steep them for or how how much you use per serving, but that's about it from what I could find from my lousy research. Flavored teas could be described as true teas with an additional flavor, but the way that additional flavor is added could be done in 3 different ways. A common one is simply adding herbal tea, which could be described as inclusion. Some examples could be masala chai tea, cardamom black tea, and peach tea. A method commonly used for mass-produced teas would be coating the leaves in oils and extracts. This can be done with both natural and artificial flavors. This is how they flavor teas that can be found on the store shelf. Since most of them are in tea bags, not everybody is going to be checking to see if there are pieces of dried oranges in their Earl Grey. A more traditional method of flavoring loose leaf tea would be scenting. This method seems to be done by layering or mixing tea leaves with fresh flowers multiple times so the tea leaves pick up the scent. Once this is done, the flowers are taken out, so what you're left with is scented tea leaves. Some popular flower choices seem to be roses and jasmine flowers. I've been talking quite a bit about true tea, so I'd like to talk about some other hot plant waters that could be found from a herbal tea and a true tea. It's like I can never escape it. One of the most popular herbal teas would have to be yerba mate. It originates and is still highly consumed in South America, but recently has grown in popularity in other regions across the globe. Yerba mate comes from the leaves and branches of the Ilex paraguayensis plant. Depending on how the tree is grown, will alter how often it could be harvested. If the tree is grown in the sun, then it could be harvested once a year. But if it's shade grown, it could be every 1 to 3 years. But similar to true teas, a slower growth results in better quality products. Preparing the plant for consumption is similar to tea, with some steps moved around and the waiting process being longer, meaning it's going to be quite a chunk of time before you're sipping on some mate. After the leaves and branches are plucked, they're put in a 2-step drying process, with the first being a flash dry, similar to how tea is roasted in a pan, but different methods could be used. The second step is a slow dry. It's typically air drying and is done over the course of several hours. The dry leaves and branches are then broken up and left to age for about 6 to 12 months. Afterwards, a final grind is done, and you're left with loose leaf yerba mate. Yerba mate could be prepared similar to how tea is, but the traditional method is more exciting. Loose leaf yerba mate fills up half a gourd, typically horizontally, then tipped over to fill up half of it vertically. Water is poured into the empty side in order to steep the leaves and keep them in place. Then a metal straw is placed in and under the mate. Then you steep the leaves again by pouring hot water into the empty side and drink it almost immediately. This last step of re-steeping the leaves and drinking is done until the mate loses its flavor. This is traditionally done in a group, with everybody sharing from the same gourd and one person being in charge of preparing and re-steeping the mate for everybody. Similar to what I did with tea, I want to touch upon the caffeine content in yerba mate. Just like tea, different regions will end up with different amounts of caffeine, but this time the amounts are a lot closer than it is with tea. The amount of caffeine in yerba mate is between tea and coffee, more specifically around the 75 milligram mark per 8 ounces. But it's not just this middle ground of caffeine dosage that makes mate so special and rise in popularity. There are other compounds helping mate to give you this unique energy. We'll get into that near the end of this video. There's just more tea stuff I want to talk about before we do. Popular Japanese way of consuming tea will be through matcha. Matcha is a finely ground green tea leaf powder that comes from leaves that were shade grown a couple weeks before being harvested. The shade increases the amount of chlorophyll, which makes the powder so green, and it alters the amount of the other compounds in the leaves, such as caffeine and L-theanine. Matcha is separated into grades, typically based on which harvest the leaves come from and what the matcha is used for. Matcha can be prepared in multiple ways, depending on how you want it, but it's just doing powder and water. Hot water is poured over the powder and then whisked to get rid of any clumps. It's traditionally done with a bowl and a bamboo whisk. Something interesting about matcha would be the amount of caffeine it contains. It could be as little as green tea and as much as yerba mate. What? The reasoning for this, despite matcha coming from green tea, is because you're consuming the entire tea leaf instead of just steeping the leaves in water then taking it out. Think of it similar to how people grind up coffee beans. Something I'd like to touch upon real quick before moving on yet again is blue matcha. Blue matcha isn't actually matcha. It's grinded up butterfly pea flowers. Of course, it's not traditional matcha and it isn't going to taste like it, but it does have antioxidants similar to matcha and it's caffeine free, which could be a bonus for some people. When it comes to grading tea, things could be pretty confusing, since different regions use different grading systems that grade the leaves on different aspects. First, I'd like to discuss a simple and general grading system which most are basically based on, which is leaf size. There are typically 4 grades: whole leaf, broken, fanning, and dust. Whole leaf is self-explanatory. It's the entire leaf. Broken refers to tea leaves that break apart during production but still resemble whole leaves. Fanning refers to tea leaves that have been broken down quite a bit but still have a texture where you can feel the individual little pieces. And dust is just tea dust. Some tea leaves would just break during production, which gives us these different grades. Whole and broken is what's typically seen in loose leaf tea, while fanning and dust are seen in the typical tea bag. This grading system is important to understand since it lets people know that tea is graded by size and not taste, even though most of the time higher grade does equal better quality and flavor. Black tea in India uses the orange pekoe system, which grades tea by the specific leaves that are mainly used in size. Typically, when tea is harvested, the buds and last 2 leaves are plucked. These are the flower orange pekoe, and pekoe. They also use the side grading system whole, broken, fanning, and dust. These uses are combined so I end up with tea grades that are called broken orange pekoe, which means the majority of the leaves are the orange pekoe and the size is broken. Other terms may be used such as golden, which means it contains leaves that turn to golden color when oxidized, tippy, which means it contains a large majority of buds, and finest refers which means the teas are young. Sometimes before finest preferred, special will be thrown on to let it be known that it's a high grade of tea, which means the highest grade of tea will be special finest tipping golden flower orange pekoe. In China, there isn't exactly a uniform grading system because of the many regions that have their own cultivating practices, so putting two on a similar grading scale can't exactly be done. If anything, it seems some similarities will be the use of numbers to grade the tea, with higher numbers meaning higher quality or what harvest the tea comes from. But typically in all the regions, a higher grade tea would mean better quality and usually whole well kept leaves. In Japan, green tea is graded on when the harvesting occurs and what part of the plant is mainly being used. This means there are many unique grades, but some common ones I could find are Sencha, which are leaves and stems from the third and fourth harvest. This is typically considered a low quality tea. Sencha, which uses leaves from the first two harvests and is the most common green tea in Japan. Matcha is considered a grade of green tea, which we have already discussed. A high quality green tea will be Kirokuro, which are leaves from the first harvest from shade grown green tea. But since we're talking about different locations grading systems, let's discuss how different locations could affect taste, since it's been mentioned throughout this video. A possible contributor to this will be the two different varieties of Camellia sinensis. In China, there's the Sinensis strain, which is the one that's been used and mentioned throughout this video. It could make all types of tea, but seems to usually be used for green and white, and it could only be plucked and harvested about 5 times a year. In the Assam region of India, we have the Assamic strain, which is pretty similar but has its differences. It likes warmer environments at lower altitudes, but still enjoys humidity. It's bigger than the Sinensis strain and grows larger leaves. It also could make every type of tea, but it's usually used for black tea and pu'er. And it could be harvested every 8 to 12 days year-round. The natural differences in the environment these two regions may bring helps explain why these different strains are used for specific kinds of tea. Lower temperature allows for slower growth, which gives the tea a gentle flavor. Moderate rainfall gives the plant more nutrients, so it tastes more fresh. At higher altitudes combine what we had just mentioned with slower growth, a moisture environment, and even more UV radiation, which allows for rich and complex flavor and aromas to come forth. All of this sounds like it'll make a pretty good green tea, which the Sinensis flavor is mainly used for, while higher temperatures speed up growth, which gives the tea a malty flavor, and drier regions that might not get a lot of rainfall during certain seasons would stress out the plant, which makes a more concentrated flavor profile. All of this sounds like it'll make a pretty good black tea, which the Assamica strain is mainly used for. I did just talk about India and China, but other regions are known for their tea varieties as well, but it's mostly like green, oolong, and black. China can really supply with any of these three tea types. Japan is a good candidate for green tea, Taiwan seems to be known for having some pretty good oolong, and as we know, India is a great candidate for some black tea. The most common way tea is consumed would be through tea bags. For those of you who somehow don't know, tea bags are bags made from filter paper that contain tea within it. It can be sealed off using heat, having it fold up, even a combination of both, and sometimes they might even have a staple. As we had mentioned earlier in grading, fanning and dust make up tea bags, which means they're usually not the best quality. Not only that, but the bag could interfere with the flavor as well, so that a cheap tea bag could leave a paper taste behind. The shape of the tea bag could be stiff and not expand that well, which won't give your tea room to move and expand. This is why pyramid tea bags are considered superior. They have a lot more room. But let's try to look at some possible upsides to a tea bag. With tea from different harvests being in a singular bag, it allows for there to be a consistent taste year round. Tea bags are also pretty convenient. It's the bag, water, and the waiting makes it so only the mug needs to be cleaned, and you don't really need anything fancy to make tea or store it in. Also, it's nice for traveling since you have pre-measured amounts of tea, but this point is going to be shut down in quite a bit. Loose leaf is typically the next step to drinking tea once you want to move past tea bags. As mentioned before, these could be whole or broken leaves and typically have better quality tea. These contain more flavor and are better at giving you the health benefits you receive from drinking tea. Of course, not all great things are cheap, so loose leaf is going to be a bit more expensive, but you are getting more bang for your buck. Making the tea might be a little more tedious since you are going to have to measure it out and put it in a filter so your tea sits in place as it sits in the hot water. If you're not trying to be environmentally conscious, you could buy empty pyramid tea bags to place your loose leaf in there. Something else to quickly mention about loose leaf is re-steeping. If you want to re-steep a tea bag, you could probably only get in one extra steep after the initial. With loose leaf, you might be able to steep 2 to 3 more times after the initial, but it also depends on how long you're steeping the leaves, since if it's only a short duration, you might be able to get multiple steep. More on that later. Of course, there are even more tea products that even your average loose leaf tea drinker might not even have. The most popular of these products being tea cakes, more specifically pu'er tea cakes. Tea cakes are loose leaf tea that have been compressed into a disc, but could also be seen in different shapes. They were originally created to help with trade and storage, but it was eventually discovered that tea being compressed together meant that only its surface was exposed to air, which slowed fermentation and allowed the tea to age, which means tea could be stored for a longer time and develop a more complex flavor as time passes by. This is why it's typically done with pu'er, which I mentioned earlier is aged and fermented. When you want to make tea with a tea cake, all you need to do is break off 7 grams and use it similar to how you would with loose leaf tea. If 7 grams sounds really specific, it's because tea cakes usually weigh 357 grams and have been like that since the beginning, since they had to be grouped in stacks of 7, which makes each stack 2.5 kilograms or about 5.5 pounds. Also, 7 grams per piece you take off the tea cake allows you to use it 51 times. Another interesting way pu'er is packaged will be through tea oranges, which are tiny dry oranges packed with loose leaf pu'er. They're intended to be steeped multiple times, and like I said with loose leaf, depending on how long you do it, depends on how many re-steeps you get. It seems that if you were to steep it to fill up your average cup or mug, you'll get about 4 steeps from a single 10-gram tea orange. It seems that we can't get enough of pu'er because a rare and unique way it's packed is via tea resin or tea paste. Basically, pu'er is brewed, filtered, and boiled to a concentrate in order to get solidified tea that can be rehydrated. Since it's concentrated, a single serving could be a bit small, which makes it perfect for traveling, which knocks down the point I said about tea bags and traveling, since these are said to be better tasting. It was originally made to carry more tea without the need to haul around a bunch of leaves, but during the Qing dynasty, it became something the elite class would drink, so after its collapse in 1911, it sort of disappeared for a bit since not a lot of people knew how to make it. It is made in today's day and age, but just like tea cakes or tea oranges, you're not going to be seeing them on your average store shelf. I was intending to cover mass-produced iced tea, but it's pretty obvious that something like that won't exactly have as many benefits as drinking your standard tea bag or might not even have any benefits at all. Most teas are stored in a similar fashion, so here's what to avoid if you don't want your tea to degrade. Keep it away from light or UV rays. Store it in a container that doesn't let any light in, keep it in a dark environment like a cabinet, or maybe even leave it in the box/individual wrappers if you're using tea bags. Keep it away from the heat and cold, so just leave it anywhere that will be room temperature and keep it away from anything that might radiate heat. Keep it away from moisture, so make sure it isn't stored anywhere that might be humid or anywhere that makes it have a possibility of getting wet. Also, keep it away from any aromas since tea can absorb them, so you might want to keep it away from your spices or anything that could give off an aroma, which includes your other teas. If you were to keep loose leaf in a container, every time you finish all the tea inside, make sure you clean it because odor from the previous tea that was in there could affect the next batch you fill it up with. Make sure to avoid air exposure with the tea, so make sure that the container is airtight so no air could enter or exit. This is why tea bags are typically wrapped in something else other than the cardboard box they're in. All of this could be summarized to say that your tea should be stored in a cabinet away from your stove or sink. If it's a tea bag, leave it in the box and in the wrapper. If it's loose leaf, keep it in an airtight container that doesn't absorb odors and make sure it's clean. Making tea is pretty simple, since all you really need to do is steep the leaves in some hot water and then you're done. But it's still important to know how hot you want your water to be, how much tea to use, and how long you steep the leaves, since it all could affect the way the tea tastes. According to Team Theory's food theory video on tea, the way to make a perfect cup of tea includes using boiling water, steeping for 3 minutes, and splashing a bit of milk on top. But it's important to note that they're making black tea and they're making it the British way by including milk. Making different kinds of tea besides black tea might have you alter the 3 factors from before, but honestly, you could use whatever temperature, amount, and steeping time you like because you're making your tea however you like it. But I am going to use full leaf tea codes guide on how to make a cup of loose leaf tea for this quick portion. They don't say how much tea they're using, but I assume it's a teaspoon since they mentioned how it's an industry standard. For black, oolong, pu'er, and herbal tea, you want to be using water that's 210 degrees Fahrenheit, and you want to steep black and pu'er for 3 to 5 minutes, and oolong and herbal tea for 5 to 7 minutes. Green and white tea should use water at 175 degrees Fahrenheit and be steeped for 2 to 4 minutes. They do have mate up there as well to follow these instructions, but I assume it's only because you're using a teaspoon worth, since we did mention the traditional method using a bit of mate and having little to no steeping time. If you're using tea bags, you might want to steep for a little less since you do typically extract their contents a lot quicker. Throughout this video, I've been mentioning how you could get multiple steeps out of loose leaf if you have the steep time be minimal, and that's because it's typically done in the Gonghu tea tradition. This typically includes a kettle, a set of equipment to make the tea in, and a set of cups to drink the tea out of. They're typically pretty small and hold between 40 to 100 milliliters. The first thing we'll look at in the tea making equipment is the gaiwan, which is pretty much a cardboard bowl with a lid, which will be used to steep the tea in. The lid is there to act as a filter so the leaves don't spill into our next piece of equipment, which is the chahai, which is a serving pitcher that is used to fill up everybody's tiny cups. When it comes to steeping time, it's pretty short at first, with the first steep being 10 seconds, but you add 10 more seconds until you reach a steep that is a minute long. Now you add 20 seconds per steep until you reach a steep that is 2 minutes, which then after you add 30 seconds until you reach 3 minutes. Then add a minute so you have a 4-minute steep, but now add 2 minutes to every steep after until you lose taste or reach about the 15th steep. All of this is sort of done to enjoy the tea in multiple stages, since if we were to just do multiple 3-minute steeps, you'd get stages mixed together. Also, I just said all of this, but typically the first steep is poured out, preferably over the tea pads, since it's sort of there to open up the leaves. Cold brewing tea is a method I like to use, especially once it starts getting hot and you want something cool to drink. Another reason to drink cold brew besides having iced tea would be the fact that it can't really get bitter, since the compounds that make the tea taste funnier are released at a slower and lower rate. Cold brewing is pretty simple. It basically has you putting some leaves in some room temperature or cold water, then putting your contraption in the fridge to slowly steep. Steeping time seems to range between 6 to 12 hours, so I would recommend putting it in at night before you go to bed so once you wake up, you have tea. Remember to have a sort of filter so you don't get any rogue leaves in your drink. I sadly drink tea from tea bags, so if you wanted to use them for cold brew, I would recommend using 1 bag per cup, or 8 ounces or 250 milliliters of water. I'm not sure how much you usually use for loose leaf, but I'd assume it's a teaspoon per 8 ounces. Sun tea is a method of slowly steeping your tea similar to cold brew, but at a slightly quicker pace. You'd prepare your sun brew similar to how you would with your cold brew, but instead of putting it in the fridge, set it out where the sun could hit the water. You are going to want to use a clear container for this one, preferably glass. But you only have to wait half the amount of time you normally would for a cold brew, so you'd have sun tea as quick as 3 hours. But it's important to note that it's considered dangerous to drink, since the tea is put in the 40 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit danger zone, which means bacteria can grow. A major reason why some people might switch from coffee to tea besides the lower caffeine content typically tends to be the health benefits that come with tea. All true teas do have a baseline of benefits such as helping cardiovascular health, your immune system, and contain enzymes and antioxidants that could be beneficial for you. But if you want to get the most out of your true teas when it comes to benefits, then you want to go for a green tea. If you want even more than what you get from drinking tea, green tea or Camellia sinensis leaf extract will be the most beneficial since consuming the whole leaf gives you everything it has to offer. Something I want to say that I noticed as I researched for this portion of the video would be how different the intake of tea was. Some had people take extracts, others had them drinking different amounts of tea, which ranged from a singular cup to 5 cups, and others tested on mice instead of people. So remember to take everything I say with a grain of salt, and don't use me as a source. Also, to say this as well before moving on to specific benefits, the reason tea is said to help you reduce your weight could be because of how low in calorie it is. According to Google, without finding sugar, a cup of tea is only going to be 2 calories, which is basically 2% of your average 8-ounce serving of soda. Like I had mentioned, out of all the true teas, green tea is going to be the healthiest choice. It is said to help fight against cancer, help you lose weight by helping to burn fat, it helps you focus and memorize because of the L-theanine it contains. It helps antibiotics perform better, and it can lower your cholesterol and help fight against diabetes. When it comes to tea and its benefits, what do you want to look at, especially if you're looking for something specific, would be herbal tea. Both anything good for you, it's important to not overconsume because then it starts becoming bad for you. But here are 3 herbal teas Harvard Health Publishing claims to be beneficial. Ginger tea contains gingerol, which is a bioactive disease-fighting compound, and it, quote, contains trace amounts of vitamins and minerals such as vitamin B3 and B6, iron, potassium, and vitamin C. End quote. It could also boost your immune system and help fight against inflammation. Like most teas that are good for you, chamomile contains bioactive phytochemicals, antioxidants, and quote, small amounts of minerals and vitamins such as potassium, calcium, carotene, and folate, and among other nutrients. End quote. Similar to green tea, it could help, quote, lower risk of death from heart disease, immune system support, and possibly protect against some cancers. End quote. Similar to the teas before, hibiscus tea is shown to have antiviral and cardiovascular benefits, help lower blood pressure, and help lower cholesterol levels. Something interesting I found when trying to look for health benefits you receive from yerba mate was to mention how it was a key ingredient and acted as a vessel in herbal medicines. Think of it sort of like syrup medicine, where the mate is there to make the medicine taste better in a way, but mate alone does seem to have more antioxidants and might even have higher cytotoxicity for cancer cells than green tea. But what I care most about yerba mate would be its energy boosting effects. Mate has caffeine, theobromine, diethylene, which are compounds that can be found in coffee, chocolate, and green tea. Most people know what caffeine does. It keeps you awake, makes you alert, and can help with focus. And theobromine and diethylene are both there to sort of do the opposite. They relax you by, quote, easing the breath, increasing blood flow, and reducing blood pressure, end quote. This results in an energy that keeps you calm and focused, and in a sense, could be seen as a naturally occurring nootropic energy drink. And to quickly finish things off, matcha. Matcha basically gives you the same benefits green tea would, but at a much higher level, because similar to green tea extract, you're ingesting the entire leaf. Also because matcha tends to have more of the good components found in green tea, since the leaves were shade grown, as mentioned earlier. Similar to all tea, the best way to get all the benefits will be by consuming just the powder and water together without any additives such as milk or sugar. So next time you're pouring your hot water over your tea leaves or just sipping your mug, you now know a bit more about the hot leaf water you're consuming. But all in all, if you liked this video, make sure you like and subscribe for more inconsistent topics and upload dates. And that's about it. Okay, bye now.